Welcome to the last video in 2018's 13 Days of Halloween.
What?
I know it's December, shut up. I've always tried to end every year's videos with something more elaborate or special. I've talked about my single favorite horror movie. I've talked about my single favorite horror anthology series, Masters of Horror. I've talked about my favorite person involved in the horror industry, the late great William Castle. And I was honestly kind of struck with the idea that I wouldn't have something like that at the ready to talk about to close out this month. Until I realized that there was a show I used to watch pretty religiously. A show that was entirely about death, with a cynical edge, amazing dialogue, some of the most brilliant characters I've ever seen on a regular series. So let's talk about Dead Like Me. Dead Like Me debuted on Showtime in 2003, and it ran for 2 seasons. The show centers around a group of people who lead ordinary lives with ordinary jobs. The only catch is that they also have a side job as Grim Reapers.
My name is George Lath. I take souls for a living.
As the show explains, death is an ever-present thing, but people's souls still have to be retrieved and sent on their way to the afterlife. Whatever it is.
So, what are you gonna do now?
I was kind of hoping you were going to tell me. Oh, you're talking to her.
So sometimes when people die, they don't get heavenly lights or the eternal flames. They become Grim Reapers themselves.
You little dead girl are gonna be a Grim Reaper.
Huh?
With a premise like this, it's kind of hard for a show like this to fail. And luckily, it really didn't. Part of that had to do with the vision of the show's creator, Bryan Fuller. If you know nothing about Bryan Fuller, he's responsible for a lot of great TV shows over the past couple years, including Hannibal, Wonder Falls, American Gods, just to name a few. All of which are totally worth getting into for at least a little bit, because each of them have a really interesting take on either death or the afterlife, sometimes both. Fuller was the guy who put the most constructive effort into getting Dead Like Me off the ground. He had a pretty clear direction for where he wanted the show to go from the beginning, and it certainly hits the ground running, but the guy does seem to have some issues staying on projects that he starts. You look online, you won't find a shortage of stories about Fuller violently leaving production on stuff before the seasons of his show are even finished airing, usually sparked by issues with creative control or the direction the producers want the characters to take, and Dead Like Me was no exception. He was only a showrunner for a few episodes. Apparently, the execs at MGM ran him ragged with demands and ideas for changing the show, cutting out themes and plot points they thought were essential to the story, and I feel like we're getting bogged down by the behind-the-scenes stuff here. How about we just talk about the show itself? Because if we go right from the beginning, right from where we first are introduced into the show, it is amazing.
I'm gonna tell you a story. Not my story, that's later. This is just a story.
Dead Like Me has one of the best pilot episodes I have ever seen. Perfectly explains all the characters, illustrates the overall tone of the show, and completely sets up the universe. In a nutshell, here it is. This is George Lass. She dies after a toilet seat falls on her head from space.
Aw, shit.
Yep, no shallow end in this pool. We're just going right in.
We have the unfortunate distinction of being called Grim Reapers.
After her death, George is met by 2 people, Rube and Betty, who come to tell her that she's dead and she'll be becoming a Grim Reaper.
What about the souls? Who takes care of them?
We do. We're bail bondsmen for the disembodied.
And when I said that the show dives headfirst into everything, I wasn't kidding, because we're here for George's first kill, and it's a little kid.
You mind telling me what it is you think you're doing?
I'm letting her live.
If you don't take her soul, it's going to wither and die and rot inside her.
I just wanted to save her.
You can't save any of them. All you can ever hope to do is make it easier.
Pilot gets absolutely everything right about this show from the ground running. It establishes an amazing idea for a series with seemingly endless possibility on where it can go. It also introduces us to a crew of amazing characters whose journeys you want to see fledged out. And what's most appealing to me is that it gives you a taste of the dialogue you're going to be getting, because this show is so much fun to listen to.
You dick, you sending me to hell?
Don't flatter yourself, you're not that interesting.
I'm not staying. I've got an appointment downtown. I hope it's not another dead hooker.
Do I need to be crossing over or passing on or something?
You ain't going nowhere until I fill my quota.
A lot of the great interactions have to do with the characters themselves, which are all pretty great. This is a fantastic cast for this. George is a gruff, sarcastic, at times unnecessarily rebellious girl who's constantly having to adjust to her surroundings and is having kind of a hard time realigning her life with the fact that she's now dead.
No flying, no leaping of buildings, no climbing walls. But we can't drink as much tequila as we want without getting hungover.
Rube is the somewhat father figure who controls the whole reaping organization, and he constantly struggles to keep everybody in line.
Now, we'll be back tomorrow, and I trust her will be fine without me. And by that, I mean try not to fuck up. By fuck up, of course, I mean Mason.
Well, why do you assume I'm gonna fuck up? Because you're a fuck up.
Roxy is a badass reaper who takes zero shits and will not hesitate to pop your stupid ass out of your body. Mason is a pad hopper from England who lives basically day to day, sometimes with a drink or a theft or two.
Are you high?
I've got illegals in my bottom.
Why do you do this to yourself?
Betty didn't stay long in the series. Apparently Rebecca Gayheart had more than a few problems she was dealing with. Betty was a thrill seeker who had a weird quirk like taking pictures of people before they die.
Why do you take people's Polaroids right before you pop their souls?
I was looking for a signature, trying to get away from the whole cloak and sickle thing. It's so unflattering.
And then finally we're introduced to Daisy Adair, actress extraordinaire from the 30s and 40s. Or so she likes to say.
I once had Dorothy's original bike from The Wizard of Oz. I knew someone from the props department.
Don't you mean you blew somebody in the props department?
New blue tomato tomato.
And it's not entirely undead characters that make up the cast, too. There's George's co-workers from Happy Time Temp Agency, which is such a great name. They include her boss, Dolores Herbig, which I think was a bet. I think Dolores was a running bet to see how likable and unlikable you can make a character all at once without changing anything.
Who are you calling an asswipe? Asswipe?
Don't touch me!
I'll touch you if I want to touch you.
There's also Crystal, who is the most mysterious character in a world full of Grim Reapers and otherworldly creatures, which is saying a lot.
Special Forces, Crystal?
And one of my favorites, which is Tiffany, the waitress at Der Waffelhaus, which is the meeting place for all the Reapers.
What would you like, sweetie?
Revenge.
We're out of that. Anything else look good?
Oatmeal with raisins.
Tiffany is interesting because she always seems comfortable with whatever situation's happening in the restaurant. She never seems put off by the constant talk of death or the afterlife or when Mason gets shot in the foot. So once you get a handle on the fact that these are Grim Reapers and that you're going to be entering this whole new universe and this whole new lifestyle, you probably have some questions. And to the show's credit, pretty much every episode asks a question and then answers it for you. Like, what would happen if death just didn't want to take a soul that day?
But what happens if somebody has an appointment with death and death doesn't show up?
That's what the first few episodes are actually centered around, George's reluctance to take souls of innocent people. She tries to bargain her way out of it, manipulate life around her to avoid making appointments, or she just flat out doesn't show up.
As fate would have it, J.P. Davis was gonna die with or without me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but mission accomplished.
You're wrong. That was me correcting you.
And when she doesn't show up, the show exploits my biggest fear, which is being trapped in my body and unable to move.
He's still in there, you silly bitch.
God. Oh, God. Oh, God.
So thanks for that. There's also the question of how death itself actually operates, and even people in the business are kept in the dark.
I don't know you, sir.
Rube. Hi, how are you? Listen, I'm tired of fucking around. Your name MJ Bowers or not?
There's very little information to go on when collecting souls. Mostly, Rube just gives them half the person's name, the place they'll be in their final moments, and their ETD.
ETD?
Estimated time of death.
It's run more like a business than a heavenly proclamation. Angels are even referred to by Rube as upper management types who don't like to get their hands dirty, which means that basically all the work has to be done by the Reapers, including menial office tasks that you would expect to find in any other job. There's an episode where nobody dies for an entire day, so they take the opportunity to catch up on death-related paperwork. They have a whole episode that's dedicated to Reapers taking self-evaluations to be handed into their death manager? I don't know.
What are the gifts you bring to your organization? No nonsense, comfortable with firearms, and I know Kung Fu.
My favorite thing about this show, as a concept, is just how much it explores the world of the undead. There's kind of a training ground for the bodies coming in where they go from being ghostly apparitions to actual physical beings, complete with a new face and a new identity so that nobody can recognize them. Also, this is not a regular job, so they don't get regular pay.
What are you doing?
Collecting my salary. Leave the plastic, cash is king.
They all have to find some way of making money or living off the land. Some people have full-time jobs, like how Roxy goes from being a meter maid to a full-fledged police officer. And some others don't work at all, basically squatting everywhere and living as drifters, like Mason does.
I have nowhere to stay.
No problem.
I have no idea how long I'll be staying.
I know.
And in terms of how death actually works, the Reapers themselves are not the cause of accidents or deaths. That is done by strange creatures called gravelings.
Sometimes when something's about to happen or just happened, yeah, you might catch a glimpse of one of them out of the corner of your eye. They set things in motion. They make the accidents happen.
The Gravelings mythology is kind of weird because originally it said that you could only kind of see them out of the corner of their eye, but there are other instances where you can stare straight at them and there they are. Other Gravelings are seen by George as a child, and there's even a character who's schizophrenic who can see things the way that George can, and he sees Gravelings out of the corner of his eye. It's weird. Sometimes the show gets bogged down in its own mythology. I'm not going to try and explain everything.
No one's dying today.
Really?
Look over there. Gravelings are taking the day off. They do it every few years.
But there's actually a reason why the Gravelings are there. It's because there are different divisions of death within the series. There's a division for natural causes, so most of them hang out around hospitals. There's a plague division, which hilariously points out that they're just kind of drifting around and haven't gotten work in the past few centuries.
Come on, Rube. We're plague division. All we've got is time. What I wouldn't give for some locusts right about now.
I hear you, buddy.
But George and the gang belong to a group called External Influence, so it's really anything that's not naturally occurring. Anything from accidents to murders to suicides, usually depicted in pretty horrific, graphic ways. Yeah, like a couple episodes in, this show had a bear attack. Awesome. The reapings take place in every episode, and they're always a lot of fun to watch. Am I doing this? Yeah, screw it, I'm gonna do this. Mr. Jericho, if you don't mind.
You just made the list!
Let's do a quick hit list. My 6 favorite reapings from Dead Like Me.
This your reap?
I don't know if I'm doing you a favor.
I don't either.
In Rube's backstory, it's revealed that he's actually a bank robber who sent money to his daughter before his death. Money that never actually made it out to her.
On behalf of the U.S. Postal System, I apologize for any inconvenience this might have caused you or your family.
I have no idea.
So when it finally finds her years later, he gets to see her just before her death and sing her her favorite bedtime song.
I'll be loving you always. A love that's true always.
I'm not crying, you're crying. Shut up. This may be cheating because there's a lot of them, but the entire reaping group follows a serial killer on Halloween, and all the reaps happen at the same exact time after the hour. And it's unknown exactly how the serial killer himself dies, as even George doesn't want to know, but she takes delight in knowing that she's putting a stop to whatever has been terrorizing the neighborhood all this time.
It's done. It's all over.
And it's made even more impactful when you see that George recognizes him as her neighbor from when she was a kid, meaning that she could have been taken by him at any time.
Where are you?
Nobody you want to know.
After being handed a pink post-it note, Mason believes that he's in trouble. Probably because he killed a guy and turned him into a graveling, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, he follows this guy into the woods where he's supposed to reap him, and having gone through a incredibly rough day, flat out explains to him what's going to happen during the job.
But one thing I'm pretty sure of is that you're going to die tonight, and I'm so sorry.
And he tells him not to be afraid because nothing bad will happen to him.
I'm not afraid. I just don't know what to hope for. Hope for another shot at it. A chance to do it all fucking unafraid.
Being a man of the forest and now fully aware that he won't feel pain, he chooses to go for a swim in the water during a lightning storm and invites Mason to join him, which is the single most badass way to go out I could imagine.
How'd your reap go?
Swimmingly. Lake. Lightning.
Another one with Mason here. He takes the soul of an aging rock star who he idolized as a kid.
You knew somebody in the churchyard. Fuck off.
Bloody hell. Bloody hell, you're Gideon Jeffries.
Because Reapers never age, he has a hard time convincing him that he was actually present for a couple of his old shows, which have been recorded onto vinyl that he wants to basically take from his house. And I just love the lines that the guy says when he realizes he's coming face to face with the actual Grim Reaper.
You've just been hanging around for years. Lurking in the corner.
It's not all it's cracked up to be.
That's good to know.
And although Reapers aren't meant to mess with the bodies of the dead or anything like that, he takes the needle out so his family doesn't have to see that. And in exchange, he gets to partake in the greatest rock power stance of all time.
Nice.
Power of prayer is very real for some people.
Yeah. Well, a million Hail Marys didn't turn me into a girl.
A man is killed just before he's about to go into surgery for gender reassignment. He follows Daisy around for a bit, reminiscing about how he felt trapped in his own body.
You bastard.
Stan.
He lashes out at God for causing him to die as a man, fully expecting that he's supposed to stay that way for eternity now.
I want to forgive him. But I want him to tell me that he's sorry first.
That is, until his afterlife is shown as a motherly, welcoming presence, and Daisy ends the episode with probably my favorite heartfelt line of the series.
Blessed art thou amongst women.
And finally, the pilot. I will always go back to this as the best because you follow the Reap from the beginning to end, and you see everything motion to motion.
I'd like to solve the puzzle.
It's an incredibly overly dramatic death that's made even better by how casually Rube approaches her after it's all over.
Hey, dead girl. Hold on there a minute.
Also, I really like Ellen Muth, and I think George is an interesting character, but the fact of the matter is that the way she died and the aftermath immediately following are probably the most interesting thing about her. Even though the whole show revolves around George, she might be the least interesting Reaper in the group, and that's really due to how great everybody else is. There's a phenomenal cast working on this show, and pretty much everybody involved in the reaping process is fun as hell to watch. In fact, there's probably only one Reaper I didn't love entirely, and that's Daisy Adair.
Come on, it's magic time. Okay. And action.
She kind of sprung into the show with the presence that screamed, notice me, and I just didn't really catch on to it. I think this is primarily because I was getting really attached to Betty, and I didn't feel like Daisy was a suitable replacement when all was said and done. At least Betty went out like a boss, though. She literally hitched a ride into somebody else's afterlife. Daisy, on the other hand, was always a little too obnoxious. I felt like she sucked the air out of every conversation she was part of. But the more I think about it, the more I think maybe that was the point.
What's the first thought that enters your head when you finish a job?
I hope they're happy.
That's lovely.
I mean, there's even an episode where the crew is cataloging people's final thoughts that they had before they died. And when they come across Daisy's, a lot of it seems to click into place. She puts on this great air of holier-than-thou elite actress extraordinaire, especially once she steals a cross and turns into this whole faith-based character. But it turns out she's just as insecure as everybody else is after their deaths. Needless to say, it's pretty heartbreaking. All right, maybe the character grew on me a little bit.
You like baseball?
Not really. I did once blow Babe Ruth.
Who didn't?
Actually, each character's personality is a direct explanation of how they're dealing with their own deaths. Roxy is aggressive and verbally abusive towards pretty much everybody. Mason resorts to drugs and alcohol on a few instances, and Rube, well, his drug of choice is pure unfiltered sarcasm.
Is everyone you just cut in front of an asshole?
No.
So it's just you then?
In my opinion, Dead Like Me is almost a perfect show. It's got comedy I love, an interesting setup, great pacing, a bit of a tone issue, but that's because of the content matter. So, what, pray tell, is my biggest problem with Dead Like Me? Half of this show is unwatchable.
Reggie's been stealing toilet seats and bringing home dead animals. Do you think slapping up a few photos is going to stop that?
After George dies, they linger on the family she left behind, which is understandable for the pilot or maybe a couple episodes after that, but every single episode spends half of its time with George's family, showing how they're grieving and lashing out at each other, going through a harsh divorce, neglecting her sister Reggie's obvious need for mental help. And I hate pretty much all of it. The mother is obnoxious. The father is delusional at best and dumb as a bag of hammers at worst. And Reggie is just a weird kid who is impossible to relate to.
Reggie, open the door.
Go away! I have diarrhea.
And their scenes drag on, and they intersect with George's at inopportune times, and it just completely bogs down the show. But the rest of it is really good, and that's what I wanted to focus on here. It's still good, even with that. So as the show continued to evolve, reviews for the show were pretty good, and a few of the episodes were nominated for a few different awards, including 2 Emmys for the pilot, which, again, is so goddamn good. But even with steady ratings, the show was canceled after its second season. Fuller said it was because there was a sense from higher-ups that problems on the set would continue and that there was an internal belief that the show's quality had dropped significantly, even though I'd say the last few episodes were actually pretty good and still contain new ideas that could be carried over into the future. So I guess if we're talking about how the show ending, we can't not bring up the movie, can we?
How about I just make it so every time you kneel in front of a glory hole, you think of me?
I already do.
Yeah, MGM put out an initiative in the late 2000s where they were making a bunch of direct-to-DVD sequels and follow-ups. One of those series that they were following up was Dead Like Me. And in 2007, 3 years after Dead Like Me went off the air, we got a little movie called Life After Death. And it is really, really, really bad.
And today, fate is telling our band of merry Grim Reapers to move on from the Ruffle House.
I won't go into too much detail about it because honestly it makes me sad, but here's the basics of it. Rube is gone. So that sucks.
Meet the new boss. Well, Rube got his lights. He had to move on.
Also, Daisy Adair is recast, which sucks even more.
She's right, Roxy. It just doesn't make sense. Unless you heard about my staggering beauty.
I know I didn't like her that much, but at least you could tell the actress was into the role. She wanted to do well with it. And in the movie, she's played by the sister of the original actress, and I didn't like it at all. Plus, the main premise of the movie is George trying to reconnect with her sister, who recognized her as a reincarnated version of herself, even though she has a different face, which, I hate it. I hate it so goddamn much. Do yourself a favor, just pretend that the shot of her walking away from her own grave at the end of the Halloween episode is the last we see of her, because that is how the story should end if this is all we get.
I don't know if I'm supposed to watch over them or just haunt them. Either way, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't having fun.
So if this show sounds interesting to you and you want something similar, you should know that Bryan Fuller has been very, very busy these past few years. Hannibal is hit or miss with me, but it's had some great moments. American Gods, I highly recommend, if only because it's the only TV show I've ever seen where someone is kicked in the balls so hard their skeleton flies out of the top of their bodies. But there is one more show that Bryan Fuller worked on that I have to recommend that you watch, and it deals with death and the afterlife, and it has somewhat of a crazy look on everything, and it was Pushing Daisies.
You touch murder victims, you ask who killed them, you touch them again, they go back to being dead, and then you collect the reward?
That's it in a nutshell.
Pushing Daisies was such a fun show. It looked gorgeous with amazingly quirky characters, had incredible set pieces, and that show was also canceled on Fuller because of the writer's strike from '08. But after Roseanne went off the air for reasons, Fuller immediately put it out that if NBC was looking for a new program to fill the void, he'd be more than happy to bring back Pushing Daisies. Instead, we got The Connors. Missed opportunity, man. Just missed opportunity.
The fun's on you, stupid son of a bitch!
I didn't see that one coming. Then again, neither did he.
For what it's worth, Dead Like Me was a great series that meant a lot to me when I was growing up. It had memorable characters, engaging and inventive scenarios, and it took a brilliant premise and didn't lose sight of what made it entertaining. Add on top of that a phenomenal cast, a really creepy and disturbing basis for a show that still somehow works, and some of the most amazing dialogue I've ever seen in a standard comedy series, and you've got yourself a recipe for success. While I'm upset that it didn't last too long, I'm glad that we got everything that we could have out of it. And bits and pieces of the series' influence and style can still be seen in Fuller's other work, so it's not like it's gone forever. The whole series is available online. I actually got a full box set of it for $25, and it is totally worth the money. It does technically mean that I had to pay for the movie, but it's mostly totally worth the money. So check it out for yourself, put it on for a bit, and see what I'm talking about. And if you're anything like me, it may even give you a little glimpse of something you kind of hope is waiting for you on the other side.
It's not so bad, being dead like me.
Thank you guys for sticking with us for this year's 13 Days of Halloween, even though it kind of stretched into Christmas. We'll see you guys next year. I'm like literally about to put up my tree. This would have been the perfect opportunity for me to talk about Nightmare Before Christmas. Oh well. Goodbye.